Really excited, as I said, to co-convene this series with SWAN. This is the second part. We had another panel earlier this year focused on building trust between utilities and innovators, looking at the trust required for technology adoption. And really excited to bridge into this conversation the really important aspects of trust between utilities and the communities they serve. Trust is really fundamental in any industry, but particularly in an industry that is so critical to our communities, to our health, and also is so necessarily risk averse for that reason, wanting to make sure we're always hitting that bottom line of delivering safe and accessible and affordable water and wastewater services. It's really critical to be bringing these themes into play. So really excited again to be convening this conversation. Before we dive into today's panel, I'd love to hand it over to our partners at SWAN for a couple words about their work. So I'll hand it over to Shirley here for a moment.
Thank you so much, Max. We're thrilled to partner with Cleveland Water Alliance, and thank you again for being here. So just quickly, I'm Shirley. I'm the senior advisor for SWAN, the Smart Water Networks Forum, the leading global hub for the smart water sector. Back in 2015, we actually launched our official affiliate in the Americas called the SWAN Americas Alliance, fully dedicated to advancing the use of data-driven technologies across drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater. We really bring this ecosystem together, including many folks joining in on this webinar today, from water utility solution providers, investors, regulators, young professionals, and researchers really advancing the industry. So again, pleasure to be here, and we really do feel that trust is a foundational component to smart water. One of the things that we do to really bring the ecosystem together and make sense of smart water noise is convening across virtual webinars such as this, but also in person and hybrid experiences. So this is our flagship event of the year. It's happening in Glasgow, May 9th to 11th, focused on making smart water mainstream, really looking how to move from early adopters to early majority. We have more than 60 utilities confirmed from across 35 countries. So again, that is also in Glasgow, but there's also virtual options for anyone that wants to join in. So that's really my quick plug. And again, we're really excited to facilitate these conversations and more across the Americas. And again, really appreciate your support. And Max, I'll hand things over so we can kick off this exciting panel.
Thanks so much, Shirley, and really excited about this upcoming conference with SWAN. The role of smart technologies and data in these conversations and so many conversations across the water sector are really critical. To dive into today's panel discussion, though, really excited again to have this conversation. As we all know, trust is the glue that allows for meaningful interactions between folks, between stakeholder groups, and between individuals. And for the purpose of our conversation today, between communities and the institutions that serve them. Unfortunately, here in the United States, recent high-profile water quality crises and a long history of systemic marginalization have eroded many community members' trust in local water and wastewater services. The result has often been a lack of authentic communication and collaboration between utilities and residents, an issue that's been made even more apparent as much-needed infrastructure investments prompt rising water and sewer bills in many communities. This is a really salient issue across the United States and across the globe, but there are some really exciting efforts that are being undertaken to try and address these issues and move us into a new era of trust in water and trust between communities and utilities. Really excited to be here today and having this conversation with our panelists. We have with us today Liz Barlick, Public Affairs and Communications Manager with Cleveland Water, the drinking water utility here in Cleveland. We also have with us Melissa Mays, an organizations manager with Flint Rising, a community environmental justice group out of Flint, Michigan. And we also have today Scott Berry, Director of Policy and Government Relations with the U.S. Water Alliance. So really excited to have this conversation with folks from a variety of perspectives kind of across the water industry and affected communities to really dive into these topics today. Before we dive into the questions that I have here for our panelists, I do want to encourage our attendees to drop any questions that you may have into the Q&A as the panel conversation is moving forward. You can find it if you go to the bottom sort of toolbar and go to more. There's a little Q&A tab. Do you want to point that out in particular versus the chat? Some folks often, get confused and drop their questions in the chat, which we will still try to get to, but we will go to those questions in the Q&A first. And since we will have limited time for questions, encourage you to drop them there, but feel free to be sharing those questions as they come up throughout the panel. So with that, really want to dive into the meat of today's conversation and ask sort of our first question today, which is, what is the state of community trust in public water and wastewater services? This is sort of a level set of where are we at here in the United States with regard to this topic. And I think, in order to try and start to dig into this question, I'd love to direct this to Melissa, speaking from your experience in Flint. So Melissa, what do you think the state of community trust in public water is today?
Well, unfortunately, and it's not just in Flint, it's near non-existent, because I don't think there is a solid definition of what trust is. I think that different sides, utilities, the government, the community orgs, the directly impacted communities, all have different definitions, and a lot of times they clash. In Flint, we get asked all the time, when are you going to trust your water? Why don't you trust your water? These kind of questions, and without asking what that actually means, but also ignoring the fact that in 5 days we're going to hit 9 years since the Flint water crisis was started, and we still have contaminated infrastructure, crumbling infrastructure, increasing bacterial and lead levels. We have a lot of reasons not to trust the water. And we're still at the point where we're struggling with just that basic part. And what people don't understand is that trust is reciprocal. We want to trust our government. We want to trust our utilities. We want to trust that the water coming through our taps, and in Flint, we pay the highest rates in the United States for, is safe. We just, nobody wants to be living off of bottled water. We want to be able to trust that. But what that means is, from a community standpoint, is giving us answers, giving us, don't shoot us down, don't ignore us, don't blow us off when we're raising, concerns and asking questions. Treat us like a partner in this, because we are, we may not have the letters after our name. We may not be in the water treatment plant, actually doing the chemistry and all that, but all that interests us because it means something to us, because it directly impacts our day-to-day lives and our futures. So I think it's important that in the future, unfortunately, as we run into more and more of these crises, that it does not take 9 years plus to come to an understanding that all parties need to work together to fix this and fix it right for the community. Because only then will trust be able to be reformed, when you realize that there's a partnership that needs to happen there, instead of people at odds with the government, people at odds with the water utilities at odds with the government, and and going back and forth. So just being able to sit down and talk about how each side can help, and listening and working together, it's huge with building trust. I mean, in Flint, there was a water switch that people didn't know about. There was improper treatment of the water that people weren't alerted to, and then it was dismissed when people were raising concerns and getting sick. And then, of course, it comes out in pieces through criminal investigations and lawsuits. That's not how trust is built. That's not how trust is earned. And also, we keep getting the trust us, we're the experts. That hasn't worked for Flint so far, and it's not going to work for people, because now people are awake and they realize that, one, I can take part in this and I can have a say in it, and what happens to me actually matters. But also, I've got to do something. That's something that, so I think hopefully everybody's learning from all this, and we can not have more Flint going forward, and not have, a crisis of not only, water quality and water access and affordability, but also a crisis of trust and the breakdown that happens. So there's a lot of things that can be done, like informing, educating, working with the community, instead of treating us like outsiders, and or that we're just here to agitate, or we're just here to fight with you, because we don't want that any more than you do. So so we're hoping that we can just start the conversation and start to move forward to where we can actually make impactful changes from all sides, to make it easier at the water utility, but also easier for the community, and put legislation forward to say, hey, look, everybody needs to get involved and work together, so no more Flints happen.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for sharing those those thoughts and your experience, Melissa, on the ground in Flint. I'm wondering, Scott, if you're seeing sort of similar trends positioned as you are at that national policy level conversation. Are these issues of trust similar across the country?
Yeah, I think, Melissa's right in a lot of ways that there's conflicting information out there. And I think it's important that we do center some of that community experience here, which has not been positive for many places. But at the Alliance, one of our program areas is the Value of Water campaign, which is dedicated to raising the public and political will for water infrastructure investment through things like research and events and storytelling and things like that. And part of that research is the Value of Water Index poll that we've conducted for 8 years running now. And this year's results are going to be made public just next week. But I get to give you folks a fun sneak preview of some of the results. And we asked a little over 1,000 people with a mix of landline, mobile, and online responses across all major demographics, some questions about water. And this is one of the things that we found is one thing that's clear is that voters generally don't trust government. And that's been a trend for years now. That's probably not shocking to a lot of folks, right? And they're about half as likely to trust the federal government as their state or local government, but generally across the board, majorities of folks don't trust government to regularly do the right thing. And when we, and important to note for folks that are, make the explicit or make the implicit explicit, most utilities are embedded in local governments. And when we asked folks if they trusted the water that was coming to their homes, there's a couple of key findings that came out of this question. The first is that by and large, voters generally overwhelmingly trust their water, with more than 3/4 of them saying that they do. And that's an important point. But the second finding is that when we also dig a little deeper, you'll see that over the last few years, the total folks saying that they strongly agreed that the water coming to their homes was safe. That's the dark blue sections in the slide you're seeing now. That's generally eroded. And you'll also see that the total numbers of people saying no, which is sort of the green thing at the far right, are rising as more people who were on the fence, kind of like gray, we're not sure, has generally shrunk, and the number of people that are generally no has risen. And so those are two key important trends that we're seeing. And if you pull out for the full picture across the 8-year life of this poll, you'll spot that sort of same important trend. While confidence in the safety of drinking water generally remains high across the board, that support has eroded over the years by about 15% among in general, and especially you can see that erosion from folks who were really confident. That has seen declines in every subsequent poll that we've conducted over the last 8 years or so. And again, the support is really high, and that cuts across every major demographic that we track, including by region and by party ID, as you can see kind of broken down here. And that also holds true with race and gender and age. And though it's notable that, and this shouldn't be a shock to folks either, that white voters are significantly more likely to trust their water than voters of color. And in particular, Black voters were least likely to trust their water, although again, it's still a clear majority. And they are also the least ambiguous about it, with the smallest segment of folks that weren't sure about, or didn't know whether they trusted their water or not. So I think there's some important national picture, national trends here that are important to track along with sort of the community experience, right? That in many cases, the sort of story that dominates is how communities and utilities have interacted and what has happened to communities across the country. And many of those stories are influencing whether people, trust water. And Melissa's right that like what we mean by when we say trust can mean lots of things to different people. We didn't ask people like, do you trust the intentions of your utility? Do you trust that they get things right? Right. And so there's still a lot of nuance not shown in some of these numbers, right? I mean, that's the nature of polling. But in general, trust is as much as a perception as it is about reality. And even in some cases, even more so about perception and reality. You could have, community A that does have a problem like Flint or Jackson or Benton Harbor, any of those places. And then community B, whose water has been safe for decades. A lot of them start asking questions. Well, like, is my water safe? And some of that trust may erode just simply because of other actors in the sector. And so it's really important to continue to be asking questions, communicating, and building that trust through a lot of variety of different ways.
Thanks so much, Scott, for helping to kind of flesh that out and show how some of these trends that we've seen obviously emerging in Flint with a crisis that really achieved national attention, but how this is really an issue in many communities across the United States. And I'm wondering now if we could turn the conversation a little more to how community members and utilities are working to address some of these issues. Obviously this is a really salient issue on the minds of communities, on the minds of utilities across the country. How are we working to address some of these issues? And I know, Melissa, you started to speak to this already a bit, but I think perhaps first we'll turn to Liz to hear from the Cleveland Water perspective. What does a drinking water utility do to start to address these issues and rebuild trust?
Yeah, thanks, Max. Scott brought up some really good points about most water utilities, Cleveland included. We are municipally owned. We're owned by the city of Cleveland. So it is lack of trust just generally because we're a government organization, and then also because we're a water utility, and water utilities are a little unique in that I think 85% of them are publicly owned versus, say, an energy company. So it's different for water utilities in that respect, and that a problem anywhere can be a lack of trust anywhere. So issues in Flint, in Jackson, in East Palestine means that people are now question the water in Cleveland. So we have a multi-pronged approach. I'll try and make it short, but the number one thing is to provide good quality water. That is our number one goal all day, every day. Customers who don't trust their tap water will turn to bottled water, which is extremely more expensive. So it's an issue of trust and then affordability. I can say since 1981, when Safe Drinking Water Act records started to be collected, Cleveland Water has had one violation in that whole time. So we're very proud of the quality of drinking water that we provide. That comes to 0.001 violations per 1,000 people served. And it's particularly noteworthy, I think, because often communities of color, low-income communities, disproportionately suffer from utilities that have Safe Drinking Water Act violations. And for the city of Cleveland, it's the inverse. We have a 47% Black population, 12% Hispanic, 32% of the Cleveland population is in poverty, but we can say unequivocally everybody gets the exact same high quality water. It's important to maintain that. So maintain that through infrastructure investment, through innovative water quality approaches. We work with Cleveland Water Alliance on smart buoys out in Lake Erie and some lead identification technologies to help make sure that we're staying ahead of that curve. Because once you fall off that cliff, it's really hard to claw your way back. Melissa said it's almost been 10 years now, and you guys are still understandably asking questions. Communication. So communication that beyond a bill is important. And it goes a long way, I think, in transparency, making transparency and accountability a priority so that people have that information before they're even asking the questions. What is your water treatment process? What is your water quality data? So we make sure to have communication around infrastructure projects. If you have a water main being replaced on your street, we're going to have a public meeting to tell you about it and what's going to happen and what to expect and what the benefits are. Targeted mailings for people who might have high balances. Here are our customer assistance programs, just finding proactive ways through earned media as well. Large scale projects that we have going on. We have 4 water treatment plants all pull water from Lake Erie. One of them can sometimes have an issue with seasonal water discoloration from manganese and hypoxia. I will explain it more if you want me to, but even though we say the water is safe, but it's discolored, nobody wants discolored water delivered to their home, even if we know there's not technically a health issue. So we have a big infrastructure project where we're working to raise the intake where it pulls water from in Lake Erie so that it's less impacted by hypoxic water, and therefore people don't get the seasonal discoloration that we've seen the last few years. Engaging directly and meaningfully with our community. We're a very large utility, and we have the benefit of an education and outreach team, and they are very active in the warm months. So spring to fall, we are at any and all events. Over 150 events. We'll have a team there providing resources to listen to our community. We make sure that we're at the whole breadth of events. And we've made an effort to make sure we're at events like health clinics or resource fairs or sustainability focused events. So we know we're reaching the populations that we need to be communicating directly with in order to provide resources, but of course also to listen. So, hey, what's going on with you and your water? Is it something you're happy with? Do you have a question with? Some of those events lend themselves to those conversations more than others. We're also at the big citywide, the marathon, the arts festivals. I think those are important too, almost for like a fun aspect. We have a big 300 gallon water buggy that we bring out. It's filled with tap water. We promote our product because we believe in it. And we offer that at big events, but like I said, making more of an effort on those focused, smaller events in the neighborhoods with people we know to have, we need to be having communications with. Tours, come through the water treatment plant. I love to show people that their minds are blown. See what happens, see everything that goes into making water safe. Talk to the people who work there who are extremely dedicated. Creating partnerships and relationships with community organizations, with nonprofits, again, to both share information and get feedback. The last few years, we've been making more of an effort to build relationships with our community development organizations, making sure we hear from them about what they need. That has led directly to translating a lot of our materials to Spanish and other languages where, we say, hey, we have a brochure on, what to do if you have a lead service line, or what to do if you have a leak, because a leak can be very impactful on a bill. And they'll say, great, do you have this in Spanish? And for a long time, we did not. Now we do. Partnering with the schools, Cleveland Metropolitan School District, and providing education related to STEM and workforce. Workforce, I think, is another component we could talk about here in terms of recognizing that we are an anchor institution in our community. We, of course, provide critical services to our community, but beyond just providing safe drinking water, we can invest in our community's quality of life through STEM education programs and workforce development programs. And I think all of these things and more that I could talk about are just ways to connect and invest in the community so that you can build more trust.
Absolutely, Liz. Thank you for giving such a comprehensive overview. It's really, incredible to see sort of the range of activities at play here. On the one side, just delivering safe drinking water, investing in the infrastructure to treat that water, investing in the technologies to be on the cutting edge of detecting contaminants and then attacking those issues. But on the other side, this whole range of communication activities, both focused on getting folks access to the resources that they need and helping them understand the science behind the water, but also just being present in the community in a variety of ways that aren't just about, convincing people this is a safe thing. It seems like an effective, multi-pronged approach. So exciting to hear about all those activities. Melissa, really interested to hear from your perspective, what is the work that Flint Rising has been undertaking and other folks in Flint to really try and address some of these issues that have been eroding trust and work to try and rebuild that?
Well, Flint Rising was formed in January, February of 2016 out of the lack of response. In 2014, right after the water was switched, people were complaining about orange and brown water, rashes, hair falling out, and it didn't stop. People who, like in my house, we'd had clear water. We were not aware that the clear water was even more dangerous. The orange and brown was iron corrosion, but then the lead you can't see. A lot of the disinfection byproducts and a lot of the other contaminants were clear, so we thought we were fine. But we had been told that it's either in these folks' heads or it's just in their homes. So it set us off realizing, oh, I can't trust the government. And we saw a lot of this with COVID because it was downplay, dismiss, and deny, right? Over and over and over again, because obviously if there's a problem, it's going to cost money to fix it. And in communities like Flint, which is majority Black and brown, and also majority living in poverty, it didn't seem like, and actually one of the emails came out that we weren't a community to go out on a limb for. So, as these things come out, you realize, okay, I can't trust, but who can I trust? And then it's a scary thing to sit here and not be able to trust the water coming in your home, the people telling you it's fine. And you're like, in my background, this was not it. I have a master's in business and I was in promotions and marketing. I figured I pay my taxes, I vote, I pay my water bill, even though it's expensive and I complained about it. But then you find out that all of it's a lie. It's traumatic. And so then basically, we're being told, trust us. And that hasn't stopped. The same people saying trust us have been, lying and covering up the entire time. So then we realized the only people we could rely on was the community. So then we started doing water testing, independent water testing. We started going door to door, helping to install tap filters, because I don't know if anybody's had to do one of them on their own. If you don't have a little magnifying glass and can read the tiny print, or if you are disabled, have arthritis, elderly, you absolutely have struggled to put one of those on. And then also the education. There was no education coming out about how to keep your filter safe. In Flint, when we have a boil water advisory due to a main break, we have to filter and then boil, because otherwise we would be contaminating the metals. So our lives have been upended. And unfortunately, we're not the only ones. So Flint Rising came together as the water groups that were running on the ground and doing the work. We formed together. We have allies from all over the country, a lot of labor support and everything, to go door to door. So we had to do the work that our government utilities and everybody here who was in charge weren't doing. So we had to educate and inform and empower the community, but also protect, to make sure they had either the bottled water, the filters, and the information to make sure it was safe for them. So we started doing the unpaid work that the government was responsible for. And this should never happen. However, a good side of it is that now we can run circles around folks with water science and chemistry, and we know better than to trust at just the word, to ask those questions. And that was another thing too, was to be given the information so we could understand it, but also to be able to have an open discourse to ask questions, instead of being called names and you're a rabble rouser, which was one of my cutest nicknames, and all that, and you're just making trouble and all that, but it was good trouble, because obviously there was a problem. And so in order to build trust, so we've built trust in the community trusts itself and each other, but it's because we've had our back this entire time and we've had external support. So now Flint Rising has also been going to other communities that are facing the same type. We were just in East Palestine. We helped Benton Harbor get fixed very quickly, and we're proud of that. We've been in Milwaukee. We've been all over the place to help, because that's the thing, is that if you give the community the information, don't say it's because, don't say you're holding it back because it's going to scare us. No, give us the information. We might not be happy about it if something goes wrong. It's mostly because we don't understand it and we don't know what's going on, and we just need to know how to protect our families. So, like what Liz was saying, communicating, let them know, hey, there's an issue, it's seasonal, this is what it means, and we'll come out and test and answer your questions, instead of saying, nope, we're not talking to you, we're shutting the gates and locking you all outside, because that's what we're dealing with. And so then looking from the outside in, we can't get the answers. Those people are absolutely actually in control of our health and survival. And so it gets very difficult, very murky and muddy. So we started teaching how to build community power, because we also know in our marginalized community, this is not going to be the last thing. And then of course, COVID came along. So we were quite ready for the government failure there, unfortunately, and it's the same kind of playbook and stuff, but we're helping teach communities this, and then how to actually reach out and speak to your elected officials. And, and there's many different ways to get the words across, obviously, protesting is, having demonstrations, yes, but also learning how to lobby, going and talking to your elected officials. And, we have late lobby days, and actually Flint Rising, we were able to help push and create the strongest lead and copper rule that's out there right now, which is the state of Michigan. It's still not good enough, but it's a huge success. I mean, it hadn't been changed. So hopefully we'll be able to replicate that across the state, but it's because the community got involved and they were given the information they needed to become their own advocates. And that that is how you build trust and community power, because then we feel like we have a sense of agency over our own lives and futures, and we can protect our family. And that's all we needed. You know, at the beginning in May of 2014, had the city told us, hey, we failed the first safe drinking water test since we switched. It's not going as planned. You know, here's what we're going to do, get bottled water or filters, and this is why. It would have went a lot better than everything's great and fine and people were dying. So, you know, it's important to realize it's not just ooh, I don't want to talk to these people. We rely on you. We rely on your information, and, you know, and you need us to also work with you, because I'm sure it's not fun, for our utility to have us show up, and our elected officials, of course, not meant to be fun for us to show up and protest. I don't want to do that. I just want to, work together to get clean, safe water, not just for Flint, but for everybody. And we have, they have that same type of program where it's community outreach and it's a teamwork type of thing. And so that's what Flint Rising has been pushing, is like, okay, all right, we do not want, and I've always said, Flint residents, we're not victims. We've been victimized. We're not victims. We're fighters, and we're not giving up. And we deserve the right to the information, and we deserve the right to work together. So that way, this doesn't continue to happen. And hopefully, it sets a good example. Like what Liz is talking about with education, so we can see the numbers that Scott had presented change a little bit, because one, if people know what their pipes are, if they know how their water is being treated, if they know what to look for and what these different things mean, and that they can go to their utility and ask questions and get the information, that is critical. It's crucial. And maybe perhaps, I'm not a fan of privatization, in case anybody didn't notice, but having the municipality still has control, so the people still have a say, and it's theirs. It's my water utility, and these are my, my people, and they're taking care of us, and we're supporting them. And I just think it's going to make things go a lot better, and then we'll have a lot less poison folks out there. And I think that's why we're all here. Number one, to do a great job to make sure the infrastructure is clean and safe, and making sure the water going through it is, and that people can actually have the water they need and pay for, and everybody can work together to make sure we advance. Because I'm excited about all of the technology, the GIS systems we use to find the lead service lines. I mean, it's amazing how this is moving forward. So we just have to build a good foundation and continue the work.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing these thoughts, Melissa. It's obviously really horrifying to hear about the worst impacts of the crisis, but in the same breath, it's so inspiring to hear about the community activation and the power that you're working to build within community. I think an aspect of trust that I hadn't really considered before you really touched on it here today was not just, building trust between community and utilities, but within the community, to then be able to engage with utilities in an authentic way that's representative of the community, to push for those changes and hopefully rebuild that trust. I think that engaged community, engaged in the process, engaged in understanding the water may be hopefully, a positive outcome of some of the challenges that we're facing right now as a nation. And I think that bridges into our last question that I'll bring here today before we turn to Q&A from our attendees, which is really about, what would it mean for our communities to truly have trust in water? And what could the future of trusted water look like? And with this, really want to hear from you all, sort of where you see this going in the future. What are your hopes for the future for our communities and for our nation regarding these water resource issues? And I know you just spoke, Melissa, but I see Liz is back actually. So I thought you dropped off for a second.
Sorry about that internet issue.
No worries at all. So maybe we can go to you first, Liz. What would it mean for our communities to truly have trust in water, and what do you hope the future of trusted water could look like from your perspective as a drinking water utility?
Yeah, that's such a great question. It's really an important aspect from an affordability and equity perspective. So like I mentioned earlier, if people don't trust their tap water, they're going to turn to bottled water. It's significantly more expensive. Bottle of water from a convenience store is $1.50. That's 300 gallons of tap water in the city of Cleveland. Or even turn to juices or pops and things that are, fine in moderation. But if that's all you're drinking, maybe you're starting to talk about some health issues too. And that can, that all starts to compound. And We know that distrust of tap water is especially common in low income and racial minorities. So that's where you get into an equity aspect of people who already can't afford, have trouble affording a lot of things and now are turning to bottled water instead of tap. It's also important in terms of the community being willing to support ongoing investments to maintain water systems or advocate for more investment. The cost to maintain a water system is expensive, and it's only gonna get more expensive, and mostly it's the burden of ratepayers, customers who have to bear it. So if you have a water system that has suffered from disinvestment and is facing now a huge bill to rebuild a treatment plant or replace lead lines, the only place you're going to get money from that is by increasing rates, and that's just double burdening your customers now, because now they don't have quality water and they're paying more to hopefully get that quality water. So there's a very big equity component to it, where if people can trust their tap water and know it's safe and drink it, there's many benefits there.
Absolutely. Yeah. A fundamental public good that has this sort of cross-cutting issues that, especially in our society, really intersect with a variety of equity issues. Thanks for those words, Liz. I'm wondering, Melissa, from your community, sort of more on the grassroots side, what does trusted water look like, and what could that future look like from your perspective?
Well, it would be starting from the ground up, literally, getting the damaged infrastructure replaced all the way up into people's taps. So that way we know that this disaster is repaired and we can put it behind us. And I'm sure that's what everybody wants. But until we actually have clean water going through, actual clean new pipes and infrastructure appliances and fixtures, we're not going to be able to trust anything unless we're literally testing our water 24/7. So starting from the ground up, but also listening to the voices, having us be a part of these decisions being made and these programs coming out. Also having us be a part in changing the laws, because obviously they're severely outdated. And, and I've gone to Congress and testified about infrastructure spending and funding for our utilities and our water infrastructure. And so we're happy to go out there and do that, to work with the utilities to get the money needed, because water is a basic human right. Access to clean, safe, affordable water shouldn't even be a fight, right? Because Flint shows that so much can go bad for such a long time, for generations, if you cut investment and if you cut the people out of it and say, here, take this is what we're giving you, and people don't know to protect themselves. They don't know what's going on. So basically what we've done in Flint, which is to, arm the community with information and let them know, hey, you don't have to wait until you're poisoned to speak up and be a part and to learn what's going on. Please don't wait until you're poisoned to do all this, but also to help change, to make the laws health protective, but also to make sure like tax dollars are going where they need to, which is clean, safe, affordable water and storage. So yeah, I think that it would be something that could be replicated. We don't want Flint to be like, this is a big mistake and none of us want to do this. I mean, yes, please learn from that. But we want it to be looked at as, oh my goodness, look what can happen. Look at the positive stuff that can happen. The laws being changed and support happening when community is involved. Because again, decisions made about us, without us, never work out.
Thanks so much, Melissa. Yeah, absolutely. Getting the community engaged in this fight and in these conversations in an ongoing way, hopefully this can mean that we don't have to have crises to get people to start thinking about these issues, and to, have utilities be pushed to have the engagement that the communities deserve. To wrap this up for us here, Scott, really curious about your perspective, at that national level. Where do you see things going, and what do you hope about the future of trust in water?
Yeah, I mean, I look at things like the poll results that I talked about and what my co-panelists have really talked about. And to me, that's a call to action. People still by and large trust their water, but that trust continues to erode nationally. And this is a unique moment for the water sector. There's more money being directed to water now than ever before. And this is an opportunity for a new normal where we can really change the DNA of how water systems get invested in, where communities and government value and invest in those water systems and really shift that framework towards, I think you mentioned it earlier, Max, towards water as a public good, and really start really shifting that framework nationally. I mean, trust is most often about things like honesty, transparency, and follow through. And you've got to have, that comes from them communication and action. You got to have both of those things. And I said earlier that trust is also as much about perception as it is about reality, which means that organizations, institutions, et cetera, you can't just get credit for always meeting standards, right? You have to be proactive. You have to change that framework, change that stance, and need to be more explicit about equity-based approaches to water and focus on utilities as anchor institutions for the community, which is something Liz was really explicit about. And I loved the way that she was talking about this earlier, about communicating, meeting people where they are, about listening as much as doing. And I think we also need to be telling the stories that connect the positive things that are results of things like investment or new infrastructure, and to connect that to what that means for people and communities. I mean, you talk about a new river where species are coming back, or a beach that people can use regularly now that they couldn't before, or a daycare that doesn't have to worry about lead service lines anymore, right? Like, we need to be telling these stories as a sector and together in partnership with communities. And the last thing I'll say here also is, in terms of vision for trust in future, a lot of folks in the water sector are talking about the things that we need to be able to deliver the infrastructure of the future, and to deliver on the promise of things like the bipartisan infrastructure law, American Rescue Plan Act, all of those things. That when I talked about all the money that was coming in, that's what I'm talking about. But there's a big promise for a lot of that coming in. But to be able to deliver that, we need to be able to have the capacity to be able to deliver it. We need to have the workforce to be able to deliver it. And we need to have the community by our side in partnership to be able to deliver it. And that access between infrastructure investment, workforce development, and trust is such an important thing that I don't think anybody seems to be talking about in the water sector right now, because we need to develop the future water workforce. But if people don't trust these systems, they don't trust the institutions to be good actors, then why would they want to work for them, right? Unless they're like, well, I'm going to be the one person that changes everybody's mind. And we can't rely on that for the rest of our lives. We need to develop trust in the institutions so that we can also develop and deliver the infrastructure that we need to deliver over the next couple of years, to make sure that we deliver, that we make good on the promise of all of the work that's going to come out of this. But also, like, that intersection with public trust means that people need to be able to trust that these investments are good uses of funds, and that otherwise we won't be able to get future ones. Because one of the other things that we always talk about is that while this is a ton of money, it's not enough. It's not going to close the investment gap. It's a great down payment, but there's so much more needed. But if that trust from the public continues to erode among our institutions and the infrastructure that delivers our water, we're never going to be able to make up that gap.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Scott, for bringing that perspective. And I feel like cross-cutting across all of y'all's comments on this is this idea that we're sort of situated at this moment where there's activation, where utilities are thinking about these issues, where communities are thinking about these issues, where policymakers are thinking about these issues. And it's meant that we're talking about them and engaging with them at a level that, is historic, but that, is also not sufficient, that we need to continue to build on this momentum as, a whole collective of these various levels of engagement to really secure the water future that we need in this country. So thank you all for sharing your thoughts on this. Really, really inspiring stuff. Want to turn now for the last 13 minutes we have here today to some questions from our attendees. Again, folks, if you want to drop additional questions in the Q&A, feel free to do so. First up here, a question for Liz. Kedar says that just one SDWA violation is really commendable. Do you think SDWA mandated water testing frequency is enough to maintain trust? I feel like we've started to talk to some of this about how additional communication is needed. But what are your thoughts on that there, Liz?
Well, in terms of Safe Drinking Water Act, I mean, the rules have changed a lot and continue to. We see new regulations. We just got new PFAS regulations. And there's always some debate over what's strong enough. You're balancing health concerns versus, cost benefit, the regulatory cost on utilities. Cleveland Water participates in something called the Partnership for Safe Water, and that is a voluntary organization led by EPA and some industry organizations, AWWA, where we actually hold ourselves to a higher standard than what's required. So we go above and beyond Safe Drinking Water Act, so that people can have that extra level of trust, of a sense of safety, and because we want to. It's very important to us that we know we have safe water. There are things that, you know, we're at a reduced monitoring schedule for, according to Ohio EPA, but we still monitor for it because we want to know. We want to know if something's coming. So that's the approach that we take.
I really appreciate that. Another question here from JD. What does it look like for a public utility to improve its checks and balances to ensure the safety of the water provided while also increasing the transparency of the process? As a utility, I could see this coming right back to you, Liz. I don't know if other folks have thoughts they want to jump in on as well, though. I want to make sure everyone has a chance to speak.
I'm wondering what exactly you mean by checks and balances, but what that brings to mind is that there's no real secrecy here. The only thing we get maybe a little secretive about is like locations of infrastructure for like nefarious security purposes, which was definitely a thing like post 9/11 world. But we make our data available in our CCR report every year. It's there. You can see what the goals are. You can see what we met. There is always more opportunity to invite the public in to have conversations about it. I mean, you do get that tension that Melissa was talking about, you know, what the community experiences versus what the data and the science says, and that exists in any scientific sphere, especially in public services. But I think there's always an opportunity to do more.
Thanks so much, Liz. Another question coming in here from Kedar, this time from Melissa. What's your impression of the role of data, for example, or in particular, machine learning in the effort to replace lead service lines? Are you thinking about these tools as part of the toolkit in your engagement with Flint Rising?
Oh, absolutely. It is extremely critical. We had index cards with all the addresses, handwritten, some in pencil, for what service line materials were. My home was listed as NA, so we didn't know until we dug. We were actually able to get data scientists in, and they actually developed, like University of Michigan actually developed a GIS system to target, because we wanted to start when so the Safe Drinking Water Act lawsuit in Flint is mine. I'm one of the named plaintiffs in it to replace the lead and galvanized steel service lines. Well, where do you start, right? So it was interesting because the human side of it, everybody wanted to start at like the oldest versus this, where the highest tests were, but it was fluctuating so much. So we actually were able to go to court to force the city and state to use this system to target the highest risk lead service lines. And we actually just went to court again over it because it's been drug out longer than it should have been. It should have been over in 2020 because they were just kind of digging at random, and the system showed. And now that we're back on using this GIS system, this mapping system that they used, we're hitting 30% still of lead and galvanized steel, which is very sad that towards the end of our program, we're still hitting that high of a rate and finding lead and galvanized steel still at such a high rate. But we're glad that we're not leaving anything behind. So I think it's fantastic. Plus, as for workforce and job development, especially Justice 40, you're going to attract more young folks if, one, what Scott said, they can trust the water utility and the water coming out, but also with, engineering. I mean, my son is a brilliant little engineer in the making, and, things like that. Nobody wants to start a job where it's like, well, I got to dig a hole and put this on an index card, and it may or may not be right. I may or may not have to go redo it and miss things. No, it's fascinating and it's awesome. And plus, it's also a way we can share the data and we can see it. So we actually have an interactive map we can click and it shows right. And that's another way to get community involved. So I absolutely am excited about it.
Thanks so much for sharing that perspective, Melissa. Really exciting to hear the level of excitement and utility that you're getting out of these types of tools. I think I'm actually familiar with the folks out of University of Michigan. They now spun that out into, I think, Blue Conduit. It's a really interesting solution that we've had, and I think on other panel conversations in the past. I should also mention that, you know, Cleveland Water Lines has been collaborating with Cleveland Water to pilot some other technologies, data related, trying to tackle these issues that are focused on subsurface detection of these lines without digging, which is one of the really big costs. And this is a really big market need right now. So we're looking at trying to incubate early stage solutions to try and get something like that to market in the future, because these are big costs, to Scott's words earlier, and the investments we're making right now are just the beginning. Another question here from Mariana. The key word is definitely trust. Has blockchain technology ever been proposed as a solution to your respective issues? I'm wondering, Scott, if you have any thoughts on this. Have you encountered blockchain in your conversations at the U.S. Water Alliance?
I can honestly say that we have not encountered blockchain as a major tool, or as a fulcrum of conversation, right? It hasn't really come up, but I also am not as familiar with sort of on the ground solutions that folks on the community side may be. So I don't know if it's come up in Melissa's things or in Liz's things at all, but by and large, I would say that some of the sort of the buzzword technologies like blockchain and AI are still sort of developing. AI less of a buzzword, but a lot of those technologies and their application are still sort of developing. And while they may be used by some of the large, well-resourced, kind of high-capacity utilities, important to remember that the vast majority of utilities, I mean, there's more than 50,000 of them out there. More than 90% of them serve less than 10,000 people. So you have a lot of actors in this space, and the majority of them are generally low capacity. So the things that are innovations now that are the cutting edge aren't going to make their way to the majority of utilities for years to come.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that our partners at SWAN would certainly be able to speak to as well. You know, the innovation adoption across the water sector is very uneven. And you find a lot of, you know, those larger utilities that really want to push innovation and be trying new things. And then a lot of the smaller utilities just don't have the capacity. Although, you know, there are certainly smaller utilities that find ways to do those things as well. You know, I've heard of blockchain used in water quality sensing and surface water quality management. But that's really just an early stage conversation, at least from my perspective as well. So perhaps this is something to explore a little more. Another question here for Scott. How can we improve collaboration between industry, academia, and the public in this space? What do you see the role of that type of collaboration being?
Yeah, and I think this is, you know, sort of the crux of some of the conversations that we have. And I think by and large, we have a communications problem first and foremost, right? Like the language of academia, the language of industry and utilities, and the language of communities are not the same. We need to be investing in effective translators between these languages, right? Like I think what Melissa was talking about earlier in terms of like building the capacity in the community to be able to understand some of these things and to be able to engage on that level, that's one avenue. Building a capacity in utilities as a communicator with the public is another avenue towards this, and building the capacity within industry to be able to talk about these. I understand that was one of the part one of this conversation, right? Last time was about that as well. And so I think there are lots of avenues towards solving this communications issue, but all of those come down to the fundamental problem that we do not speak the same language often. And then that is the biggest problem. And if we were able to solve that problem, we could start arranging for the ability to more effectively collaborate. You know, given there may be barriers in places like Flint where there's a history that needs to be overcome. It's not just like, oh, we don't talk the same language, right? It's like there's an actual history here, and we have to acknowledge and heal from past harm. That, you know, there are certain places in the country where that is sort of the key thing, and academia, industry, and community can all work together on that too. But there are lots of other places too where that may not have that sort of history of harm, but that you still have this sort of like barrier of not really being able to understand one another. And I think those are the main ways to start breaking down those barriers, is to really invest in communication skills and in communicators.
Absolutely. I think that's really valuable. This is the last question we have here right now in the Q&A. So I'm wondering if Liz or Melissa, you have any additional thoughts you want to weigh in on this sort of cross-sector collaboration or the importance of communication, or really just any closing thoughts you might want to share in these last 2 minutes. Maybe I'll bump it over to, oh yeah, Melissa, go for it.
No, just what Scott said, 100%. If we're speaking the same language, then you can understand what we're telling you is the problem, and then we can understand what you're telling us is the solution. But also making us a part of the solution instead of saying the people are the problem, the people raising issues or asking questions are the problem. It stops seeing us that way if you start seeing us as part of the solution, because hey, we're on the ground and we're letting you know ahead of time, even before your testing might show, because you can't test for every contaminant 24/7. That's just not possible, unfortunately. But hey, we're letting you know it smells funny, it looks funny, and we're letting you know this is an issue so you can catch an issue before it blows up. So looking at the community as part of the solution along with you, and making sure we're all on the same page and we're all working together and transparent about it. That's how we're going to get this done. That's how we're going to repair the harm, just, stop replicating these same, awful, damaging, harmful, traumatic cycles that we've been doing, and actually work together to say, all right, we all have the same goal, at least we should, clean, safe, affordable water and sanitation. But let's work together and actually make that language together, make the plan together, and, basically start from ground up, roll forward together.
Absolutely. Any last thoughts from you, Liz? I know we're about to wrap up here.
Yeah, I think both Melissa and Scott have done a great job summarizing, and most importantly, that everybody here's on the same page. We all have the same end goal. And maybe if we had more of these conversations in other places, we could advance that goal. But I feel like such a big chunk of my job sometimes is taking engineer speak and making it public speak. It's like, okay, I understand what you're saying. How do we make the public understand that? And I'm guilty of it too. I've been working here for 5.5 years now, and terminology that is just standard industry terminology starts coming out, and it helps to have a new perspective of like, wait, not everybody knows what a chlorine residual is. Why would they? I didn't know about it until I worked here. And yeah, translation is important.
Yeah, absolutely. And being able to speak that same language is just a starting point to building trust, right? Even if, as was said earlier, you're passing all the tests, that's not enough. You have to be able to tell the narrative in a way that resonates with people. Yeah, wow. So we're now past time here. So I just want to take a moment to thank our panelists so much for being here with us today. Scott, Melissa, Liz, thank you for sharing your perspectives and your knowledge with us. Thank you to SWAN and to Cleveland Water Alliance for sponsoring this event. And thank you to all of our attendees for taking some time with us this afternoon to talk a little bit about trust in water. This recording will be available after the fact if you ever want to come back to this conversation, but encourage you to take bits and pieces of this back to your own work and your communities, and feel free to reach out to me or to any of our panelists if you want to dive deeper in the future. With that, I'll say thanks one more time, and we'll wrap up for today. Bye, y'all. Have a good one.